Well, first of all, he really doesn't have any strategy here. He understands nothing about economics. He doesn't even understand how tariffs work. And I think it's pretty clear by now that that's the case. And I would like to think that somebody who purports to be an economist would at least admit that much, because we have seen the backlash. We have seen that starting an unprovoked and unilateral trade war against some of our largest and most important trading partners has not worked out well for us or the global economy. Donald is a bully and he's a coward, which is why we have seen the backtracking, which is why we have seen, as you just pointed out, that China's strategy has actually worked for China, to China's benefit, because...
Shocking revelation. Donald Trump's own niece tore into him like a bargain bin to pay caught in a hurricane, unleashing a meltdown so intense it made Chernobyl seem like a softly burning scented candle. Mary Trump didn't just spill the tea, she dumped the entire kettle, smashed it to pieces, and lit the whole table ablaze. And Uncle Don? Let's just say his ego might be hiding out somewhere deep underground, right next to those long-lost tax returns. Buckle up, this family feud makes Thanksgiving dinner look like an all-out UFC showdown.
You write in your new book, the trouble with Donald had started long before he entered school. At home, he tormented his little brother, Robert, a year and a half younger, and seemed to have nothing but disdain for everybody else, including and perhaps especially his mother. The kids in the neighborhood alternately despised and feared him. He had a reputation for being a thin-skinned bully who beat up on younger kids, but ran home in a fit of rage as soon as somebody stood up to him. I mean, is that... I mean, it's fascinating to hear that description of a little boy and seeing the man.
That is one of the most damning and dangerous things about Donald Trump, and that is the thing that one of the things that makes him most unfit. He's never evolved from that. That's still who he is.
Donald Trump just got scorched by someone who not only shares his last name, but also a small slice of his DNA. That's right, the woman tied to him by blood is out here calling him out like a Kardashian serving court papers, if poetic justice had a face, it would be Mary holding up her psychology degree in one hand and his latest indictment in the other, making sure every blow lands with precision and purpose.
Mary Trump is the niece of President Donald Trump, a clinical psychologist, author of Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. She describes Donald Trump as a sociopath who grew up in a dysfunctional family that fostered his greed and cruelty, which he is now inflicting on the world.
Now, to be fair, Trump taking heat isn't exactly breaking news. It's practically a weekly ritual by now, but getting called out by his own niece, that's not just a roast, that's a full-blown family cookout. And Donald, he walked in carrying gasoline, thinking it was barbecue sauce. Spoiler alert, he didn't grill anything, he got absolutely smoked.
He turned to his next oldest son, Donald, who had no skills, no requisite skills to be an entrepreneur or to expand the business the way my grandfather intended. However, he did have a bunch of defense mechanisms that he had used to protect himself from his, quite frankly, bleak early years on the planet, that my grandfather found very useful. Donald's bullying, his grandiose sense of himself.
It's almost impressive. Honestly, the man built his entire image on being untouchable, unstoppable, and, of course, very stable. Then enters Mary armed with a PhD and a verbal scalpel slicing through that fragile ego like it's dodging unpaid child support, and believe me, she's not pulling punches. She didn't show up with a butter knife, she came wielding a chainsaw made of receipts, deep psychological analysis, and the kind of composed fury only someone scarred by family history can deliver.
Because why should they? I think the best thing for the rest of the world to do, especially given the fact that Donald's ridiculous and ultimately dangerous tariffs are going potentially to create a global recession if we aren't careful. There is literally no reason to work with the United States right now, and we see China exploiting the vacuum that we've left, right. And we see other countries willing to stand their ground and get to the point where the United States becomes isolated economically, which will be terrible for us.
Let's just take a moment to appreciate the irony here. The same man who used to proudly call himself a genius is now being fairly picked apart by someone who actually trains real geniuses to identify narcissists in the wild. And let's be honest, she didn't have to look very far. The case study was practically tweeting his symptoms in all caps every single day for 4 straight years. And when it all hit the fan, oh, he absolutely lost it. The man was flailing so dramatically, you'd swear someone had replaced his bronzer. With acid, his response, the usual mix of fury, finger-pointing, and wild accusations thrown around like expired steaks at a Mar-a-Lago buffet. You could see the meltdown happening in real time, veins popping, his tie somehow a shade more orange than usual, and his hair doing that strange cotton candy swirl it gets when the humidity decides to join the party. All he was missing was a wail and a toy rattle to complete the full toddler meltdown, but this goes way beyond just hurt feelings. This is about Trump finally going up against someone who knows exactly where the skeletons are stashed because she literally watched him hide them behind the gold-plated fridge. This isn't someone who needs court orders to start talking. She's been sipping that tea since childhood, right there at Thanksgiving dinner, seated next to a man whose idea of gratitude was yelling at the mashed potatoes for not being sculpted into his face.
While going straight at Donald's vulnerabilities, the narcissistic injury she inflicted on him in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the debate did exactly what it needed to do, which, as you just said, was make him unravel. He couldn't recover. And honestly, he's not going to.
Mary didn't just expose him, she broke him down piece by piece. And this wasn't some petty tabloid spectacle. This was forensic level detail, like a full-blown CSI episode focused on family dysfunction. She took the legend of Donald, built on bravado and bankruptcies, and fed it through a psychological shredder with the calm precision of someone who's been studying this chaos since she was losing baby teeth. And what makes it even more powerful, she doesn't have to shout. She doesn't throw insults or hold bizarre press events in front of landscaping businesses. She just steadily, clinically explains why her uncle is essentially a walking DSMV entry in a red tie, complete with delusions of grandeur. Meanwhile, Trump is tucked away in his corner of the internet, hammering the caps lock on the word fake like it's a magic spell that'll erase every lawsuit in one go. The family tension, it's cinematic gold. Trump spent years polishing this image of dominance, power, and oversized success only to be unraveled by a relative whose sharpest weapon is simple, unvarnished truth. It's like watching a balloon rage at a pin. For decades, he bulldozed over anyone who dared challenge him: contractors, employees, beauty queens, even entire countries. But the one person he never expected to be keeping score was the quiet observer at the family gathering, silently taking notes the whole time.
Did you ever hear Donald Trump, your uncle, use the N-word?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I know that sounds awful to put it that way, but when you live in a family, and you're a kid, it's not that I didn't know it was wrong. I did, because I lived a very different kind of experience growing up. I lived in Jamaica, Queens, which was, lower class, working class, and predominantly African American. I went to a school that was predominantly Jewish. So I didn't understand the animus, but it wasn't shocking because it's just the way it was. This is how adults in my orbit spoke and behaved. And now, of course, I learned a long time ago that it wasn't just something I disagreed.
And of course, his followers are spinning out like broken weather vanes in a windstorm. They can't decide whether to call her a liar, a government plant, or the Antichrist with a doctorate. 1 minute she's just a bitter family member, the next she's supposedly being controlled by George Soros, and 5 minutes later it's somehow all Obama's fault. At this point, the conspiracy theories feel like Mad Libs missing half the grammar. As expected, Trump slid into his classic defense mode, a bizarre mix of mob boss swagger and toddler-level reasoning. You know things are getting serious when His statements start sounding like they came from a shaken magic 8-ball. She's jealous, she's irrelevant, she never liked me. Watching it unfold is like seeing a man argue with his own reflection because the mirror refused to vote for him. Meanwhile, Mary stays composed, dissecting everything piece by piece with the focus of a surgeon. She's the type who could walk into a burning house, calmly identify who lit the match, and hand over a full psychological profile of the arsonist. Her approach is devastating in its simplicity: no drama, no flair, just clear facts, deep context, and a firm grasp of the bigger picture. Because this isn't just about one man spiraling, it's a full-blown case study in how unchecked power, entitlement, and delusion can bend reality until it breaks.
And now, of course, I learned a long time ago that it wasn't just something I disagreed with, but it was deeply wrong.
Trump despises that more than anything else. He can brush off political opponents, shrug at media takedowns, and even laugh off late-night comics mocking his signature hand gestures. But when it comes to family, that's a whole different battlefield. Family is supposed to protect the brand, cover your tracks, and pretend the gold-plated toilet is a classy design choice. So when Mary swapped out the family photo album for psychological assessments and detailed timelines, he freaked out. And let's be clear, Mary didn't just step into the spotlight. She showed up like a wrecking ball in a doctoral robe. She didn't whisper secrets from the shadows. She walked straight onto center stage, under a full spotlight, armed with receipts, documents, and the kind of fire only decades of frustration can fuel. She didn't just throw him under the bus, she designed the crash site, installed rear view cameras, pointed out every blind spot, and then calmly explained that Trump had handed her the keys, floored the gas, and live-streamed the whole thing on Truth Social.
I do, especially from 20 years ago, but even from 8 years ago. He has much less impulse control, to the extent he ever had any. He is incapable of bringing a thought to conclusion. He goes off on tangents. And I think part of it is because he hasn't been pressed. He hasn't been challenged. And he's gotten away with so much. This is a man who spent his entire life pushing the envelope to see what he can get away with. And as soon as he realizes nobody's going to stop him.
She dissected his personality with the precision of a brain surgeon and the flair of a stand-up comedian. This wasn't just a tell-all, it was a roast, a psychological autopsy, and a family reunion that somehow went gloriously right. And Trump? The best he could muster in response was a grammatically questionable meltdown that read like it was dictated between mouthfuls of filet-o-fish and slices of ego pie. It sounded like he typed it with his thumbs while choking on pure spite. What makes it all the more satisfying is how completely unprepared he was for this particular storm. His usual playbook mocking nicknames, flashy reality show theatrics, and the subtlety of a screaming goat totally backfired. You can't gaslight someone who saved the receipts, color-coded the red flags, and double-majored in your psychological patterns. Mary spent her childhood watching him empty that same bag of tricks at Thanksgiving dinners. She sat front row at the Chaos Factory, and now she's the tour guide calmly explaining the difference between ordinary dysfunction and full-blown delusion.
He's going to do anything in his power to make sure that doesn't happen. And we already see he's cheating already, by telling people that it isn't safe to vote by mail in the middle of a pandemic, by telling people that if Joe Biden wins, it will have been rigged. That's cheating. Because he's using the power of the Oval Office to get that message across.
And of course, his base tried to brush her off the way they dismiss every uncomfortable fact through memes, misspelled outrage, and the usual deflection to Hillary's emails. But it's tough to undermine someone with the credentials of a clinical psychologist and the weary tone of someone who's been emotionally drained since the Reagan era. Mary's got peer-reviewed research and the kind of stone-cold calm you only see in people who've survived years of family group chats. With narcissists, she didn't just scream into the void, she sorted it, categorized it by behavioral patterns, and handed the rest of us a handbook titled Asterisk, How to Emotionally Survive a Relative Who Thinks They're a Golden God Asterisk, and now that she's holding the mic, her voice isn't just loud, it's lethal. This is where surgical precision collides with generational reckoning. Trump never saw it coming, but Mary, she's been preparing for this moment her entire life.
His father was born in Germany. Can you understand why?
It's really fascinating what Donald gets wrong sometimes. And, you know, it's difficult on occasion to know if he's doing it on purpose or not. So that confuses me. He used to say that he was Swedish. You know, when asked what his ethnicity was, he would say Swedish because, you know, the excuse given was that they worked with a lot of Jewish people and they didn't want to offend them he didn't want to offend them by admitting to his German roots.
This entire saga is what happens when the so-called black sheep of the family turns out to be the only one driving with the headlights on. The rest of them are lost in a fog of denial, pretending the family empire wasn't propped up by shaky loans, terrible choices, and the delicate ego of a man who treats empathy like it's some kind of communist plot. But Mary, she flipped on the high beams, and Donald, bless his burnt-umber soul, couldn't retreat into the shadows fast enough. He threw every trick in the book at her: legal threats, personal jabs, and the classic "I barely even know her" routine, which is hilarious coming from a guy who once sat across from her at Thanksgiving screaming at the cranberry sauce because it didn't look patriotic enough. But sure, Donnie, she's practically a stranger. The whole thing is as predictable as it is wildly entertaining. Watching him spiral when faced with real accountability feels like watching a raccoon try to work a microwave. There's frantic banging, unintelligible squeals, and eventually something goes up in flames. In this case, it's his dignity again.
He's essentially absent for almost a year. She had suffered very severe postpartum issues after my Uncle Robert was born that had gone undetected for so long that they were life-threatening. And that was the first major experience that shaped Donald. He experienced her absence as an abandonment. And my grandfather, who was a straight-up sociopath, was incapable and unwilling to fulfill the caregiver role. So Donald was very lonely and very frightened at an extremely crucial developmental period. So, you know, he was never able to make up the deficits that occurred at that time.
Mary's not out here chasing fame or trying to push books the way Trump cartoonishly insists. What she's doing is far more dangerous to him. She's telling the truth. Not the theatrical, capital T truth he claims ownership of every time he's booted from another social platform. No, this is truth grounded in observation, backed by evidence, and delivered with a real grasp of human psychology which, as you can imagine, hits Trump like garlic to a vampire. And oh, does it burn, because deep down, even he knows she's not wrong. He's not angry because she lead, he's furious because she dared to say out loud what everyone else has only whispered, and she backed it up with data. In Trump's world, that's the ultimate betrayal. Honesty is treated like treason, logic is labeled sabotage. And anyone who isn't constantly feeding his ego is automatically part of some imaginary left-wing coup powered by wind turbines and gluten-free cookies.
I hope that more media outlets allow us to hear what Donald's actually saying instead of taking it upon themselves to quote unquote translate him. His nonsense is untranslatable. So what ends up happening, because human beings need to make meaning of things, is that certain reporters and journalists end up imbuing Donald's meaningless statements with meaning, so they don't seem as dangerous and, quite frankly, unhinged as they really are.
He's tried to spin the narrative, of course, turning the spotlight back on her, calling her bitter, unstable, or irrelevant, which is rich coming from the same guy who once attempted to buy Greenland and genuinely believes Diet Coke qualifies as hydration. Every insult he throws at her boomerangs right back with his own name etched into it. The more he lashed out, the clearer it is that she struck a nerve deeper than any political rival ever has. This is the key difference between a critic and a witness. Critics take jabs from the sidelines. Witnesses walk in carrying files, footnotes, and the kind of exhausted stare that silently says, "I've lived this." Miri isn't just airing family secrets, she's constructing a full-blown forensic museum of dysfunction, and admission is free. What Trump can't stand is that she's out front, calmly handing out the brochures.
Trump went to a military academy for high school. Explain why he went there.
In, I guess it would have been, middle school, I guess, his behavior started to become increasingly belligerent and uncontrollable. So, and it wasn't just at home, it was at school as well. He went to a small school in Forest Hills, which is actually the same school I attended when I was a kid. And my grandfather was on the board of trustees at that school. So I think on the one hand, my grandfather found it annoying that his son was creating problems in a school that he was associated with.
At the end of the day, Trump being torn down by his own niece isn't just poetic justice, it's the collapse of an entire persona buckling under the weight of its own illusions. Mary didn't need a megaphone to make an impact. All she needed was the truth, a backbone, and a working microphone. Trump, on the other hand, seems to suffer from a truth allergy, a base that's slowly shrinking, and a growing archive of public meltdowns that could give Chernobyl a run for its money. So when people wonder what the most brutal betrayal he's ever faced is, it's not the courts, the media, or even the voters. It's the moment his own flesh and blood stood up and said, "That's enough," and for a man whose entire image is rooted in family loyalty and overblown self-worth, that's the cut that slices the deepest.